Let's start. Let's get going.
All right.
Level 3.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Alicia Sherman. I'm a school librarian from Binghamton, New York, and I'm excited to be facilitating this conversation called Bringing Your Book to Life, working with an audiobook narrator with Bruce Coville, rhymes with Oval, and Rebecca Soler. A couple things about this session today. We are running from 11 to 11:45. If you have any questions, I'm going to ask the questions on your behalf. But if you have a question, feel free to pop it in the chat, and then we're going to sort through those, and then we'll filter them through to our panelists. And just so you know, this session is being recorded. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Betsy Gilbert, and I'm very happy to see you all here. This is a very unusual year for all of us, but for Teen Book Festival, we've gone virtual and are terribly missing everybody. I am on the board, so on behalf of the board and all the committee, I want to welcome everybody and just let you know that this is an organization that's completely and totally 100% volunteer. So the people who have been working on the committee, if you contact them, make sure to thank them because they've been really working hard for a very long time to make this happen and make it up as they go along since we're virtual. We have two people today, Bruce Coville, who lives in Syracuse, New York. For those of us in Rochester, he's our neighbor. And he is making his second appearance at the Teen Book Festival. He started thinking about becoming a writer in the 6th grade and became serious about it when he was 17. So he's been working very hard for a very long time. While he was working towards selling his stories, he had many other jobs, including being a toy maker, a grave digger, a cookware salesman, and an assembly line worker. Eventually, he became an elementary school teacher and worked with 2nd and 4th graders. He married his high school sweetheart at 19. She's an artist, and they've created books together. Some fun facts about Bruce. His favorite film is Singing in the Rain. He eats peanut butter every day, as do I, Bruce. And I also love Singing in the Rain. And he's a total musical theater fan and once managed to hit himself on the head with a sledgehammer.
It's a long story.
Yeah. And Rebecca grew up in Boston, credits her mom with reinforcing the pronunciation of the letter R at the end of her words. A really serious skill if you're going to be an audiobook narrator.
Correct.
In high school, she moved to Sugar Land, Texas. I wonder what that did to your Boston accent.
Oh, wow. Stories. We have stories.
Met her best friend and future husband while in a riveting production of Once Upon This Island. So we have two people that married their high school sweethearts.
Yeah, Bruce. Simpatico. High school sweethearts all the way.
Yeah.
Spends much of her time in a recording booth. I've heard recently that could be her closet. Convincing you to buy stuff, making silly voices, and narrating YA novels. She's an expert in unrequited love, the supernatural, frozen yogurt, cleaning, household cleaning products, and supernatural teas where we froyo while cleaning. I'd like to know at some point what it is you've been selling us. So I'm really excited to have these two here and welcome everybody who's joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, first question is for both of you. Do you ever listen to the finished product of your own book?
You want to go first, Rebecca?
The short answer is yes, but not in its entirety. And the reason why I do is because I do a lot of series. So I want to make sure, I take a lot of notes, but I want to make sure that I remember, the character in book 1 that randomly shows up in book 5, what choice I made for that person 4 years ago, because I won't remember. So there are certain sections. And then sometimes I just like to hear, Bruce, you're the expert at this in terms of the multicast, but I like to hear how everything, is sound designed and engineered. So I'll listen to little snippets of everything. But in terms of just listening to my voice for hours on end, the answer would be no.
And I do listen to all the recordings. I narrate on occasion, but at Fullcast Audio, I'm the producer and often the director. So I listen to the final recording, the final cut, to vet it before we unleash it on the world. That's can be pretty time consuming, but we don't do an awful lot of books every year. But yeah, I hear the first pass, and I go through that very carefully to look for errors. There's things that happen when you're pasting together a bunch of voices, a bunch of takes. And for extraneous sounds, I trained with a fellow named Tim Ditlow, who used to run Listening Library, one of the major recording companies. His dad founded his second oldest audiobook company in the country. And Tim was a real fusspot. And so I learned that from him. And
well, Listening Library, you have to be perfect, word perfect.
Tim used to get notes from engineers. As you were talking earlier about breaths, and Tim would send notes to engineers about this breath is too big. And sometimes an engineer would call back and say, Tim, they're human beings, they breathe. So, but yeah, Listening Library produces a very, very clean sounding recording. And that was my training, so that's what we try to do. So yeah, it's going out under my name as the producer director. So I vet the final pass. Now I'm often in it as well. And then I flinch and say, we should record my lines because everybody else is good, but I suck. But
this is actually a follow-up question from me. I know the typical, let's say, young adult audiobook could be 7 to 9-ish hours, right? So if a book is 7 to 9 hours when it's done, how much time did you actually put into creating? Is it like 2 days of your life, 2 months of your life? How long does it take for all your parts and pieces to come together into one 7-hour to 9 hour?
Rebecca and I have very different answers on this.
Yes. Well, because of the multicast, that's its own sort of situation. But if you're doing a traditional first person narrative, I think of it in terms of pages. I'm a little bit of a machine, but I do like a lot of prep prior. So I will read the book 3 times prior to recording it. First time is as a fan. Second time I highlight it and make notations. I have a musical background, so oftentimes it's like breath work or forte, piano, things like that, tempo. And then the third time is the night before I read through what I think I'm going to record the next day. And I can generally record around 120, 140 pages a day. So for your 7 to 9 hour book, it might be 2 days for me. It might be 2 days and it just depends. But they're solid days, so full days.
I'd say 120 pages is going at a pretty good clip. A full cast recording, because of the nature of having people in the studio, which we always did before COVID, having everybody there, there's a lot of time moving people in and out. We have a 4-microphone setup. We might have 8 actors doing a scene. So there's some shuffling. We have to do what we call the microphone gavotte. And our formula, our rule of thumb is we spend about 4 hours in the studio for each recorded hour that gets on the final recording. We tend to have, which is not typical of audiobooks, again, because it's a full cast, we always like to have a full cast rehearsal in advance. That's probably a couple hours per.
Wow, that's delicious.
Wonderful. That's it. One of the things is we find out where the laughs are and get them out of the way, because some of the stuff we record is very funny and the actors can be very funny and they'll bust us up, and that would really slow down the recording. But they also get used to each other and what they're going to be doing with each other. Yeah, it is delicious. And then that doesn't address the engineering. Once the recording is done, the work done by the engineer to clean it up, get out all the material. We sometimes you take 5, 6, 8 takes to get just the right sound looking for the right match of the actors. And all that has to be cleaned up by the engineers. And I couldn't begin to tell you how much time they spend on it. It's a very laborious process. So in a financial sense, doing full cast recordings is an idiotic idea because it costs way, way, way more than a single voice recording does. I do this more out of love than financial common sense.
So in times of COVID, because you can't have full cast in the room, if I'm one of your cast members, am I just reading my lines with nobody responding to me? Or do you have like a sub actor just kind of feeding lines to go back and forth with them?
Here's what we did with the last recording that we did. We spent some time, we just didn't go in the studio for a while. We didn't record anything for a little while when this first started. We recorded in a fairly large space, and the setup has always been 4 microphones side by side, and I can have 8 people in, going back and forth on the mics. And then I'm standing a certain distance away, right behind the soundboard, directing. So when we did the first recording we did in the time of COVID, we took out the middle 2 microphones and moved them into the absolute back of the room. And that created a triangle with 13 feet between each of us. Then there's a separate booth where we could put 1 other actor. So we had our 3 principal actresses actually, in for that. And then I brought in the smaller parts one by one. Sometimes we could have 2 people on mics. So it wasn't as unified a recording as I liked, but it did the job. It wasn't as much fun either. Everybody said, I miss having a bang here.
I bet. Rebecca, we talked about this a little bit before everybody else came in the room, but I had heard that Disney was having their voice actors work from home, like Raya, those characters were working in their closets and whatever, and you said that you are doing a little bit of that. You want to tell everybody about that?
Yeah, so pretty much across the board, all of the voiceover work I do, including audiobooks. I think it was March, my agents called I had a baby in February and I had planned on, recording some stuff in March, and my agents called me and said, Rebecca, with this pandemic, the industry's closing, but voiceover is not. So if you want to work, you're going to have what's considered a broadcast quality booth, and quickly, which when you live in the heart of Manhattan, we don't have homes in multiple rooms. We have closets. So I had already had a setup that was really decent for auditions, that were for competitive auditions. So my husband is also an actor, and we just kind of, egg crated up our closet, and a shelf that had shoes is now the MacBook and the recording equipment, mic stand, big soundproof wall that kind of folds out and sticks in behind me. And if it's anything other than an audiobook, I can stand, animation or commercial. I do a lot of what's called ADR and loop groups, which is sound design for film and television. That's still predominantly in my closet. And the industry actually had to adapt because there wasn't really technology. There was something called Source Connect, which was good for one person to be recorded by an outside source, but not multiple people. And so now, people much smarter than me created technology that I could never have dreamed of building that allowed me to continue to work all literally like 3 feet in that direction. I won't show it to you guys, but trust me, it's right there. So yeah, so I've been really grateful to be able to continue to work, and adapt. I sometimes record myself, which is not something that I had ever done prior as a narrator. Having to, there are people that went to school that have exceptional skill at listening and directing and engineering, and everyone's kind of learning new skills as, we are all learning how to do a virtual team festival together, right? So adapt and overcome. But it's been a challenge, but I'm looking forward just to the collaboration that you miss when you are just alone in a closet with your cat laying on your foot, That.
Barbara Rosenblatt, who's one of our greatest female narrators.
Oh, sure.
And has this, she's smoked forever and has this sort of deep whiskey voice. And I was sitting with her once, and we were talking about what we do. She said, darling, nobody would have monster would put an actor in the studio without a director. So it's hard directing yourself. It really is.
It is. It's hard. I have really as I said, I prep so much that I kind of know what I want to do, but it's nice to have someone else to say, hey, let's just try that again. Or, or what about this? Or, even like how to pronounce certain strange words if I just flubbed it and I'm stopping and, all that good stuff and I'm re-looking it up. But yeah, the collaboration is not always inherent in audiobook narration when you're doing kind of even multi narrators. If you're doing one chapter is one person, one chapter is another, we normally record them separately from each other. So Bruce, you're just like describing Narnia to me in terms of the, I don't know if I should be moving to Syracuse or what. This is great.
We have this. I want to ask you about the noise in Manhattan. It's a noisy city. How does that affect what you're doing?
You stop. I live inches away from Mount Sinai West. If I don't have my curtains drawn, they can see me and I can see them. So, you know, every once in a while there's an ambulance, there's a fire truck, there's, you know, there's stuff, but, you know, we just pause, hold, let it go through, and continue. I mean, it is a good setup. We soundproofed the heck out of it, you know, so, but, you know, things are going to bleed in. And then even in the Manhattan studios, when, you know, I'm in studio, if we're on the 11th floor, but the 12th floor is doing construction that the, you know, building is allowed, we hear like bang, 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 bang. And, you know, I just have savvy people on headphones that are like, hold, sorry, Rebecca, that bled through. Let's take that paragraph again, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's my life.
So, yeah.
The studio we use is out in, is in a rural area. It was built by a rock musician to record rock music. And we've been using it for 25 years. We've sort of retrofitted to do audio, but you know, he didn't have it that soundproof because when you're doing hard rock, if a truck drives by, you don't hear it. But if you got someone soft speaking in the microphone, every plane, every truck, every motorcycle, and the nasty lady next door on her lawnmower, who we think rides her lawnmower just for fun. She picks up good vibrations. Is this interruption? But another thing I wanted to ask you is about catching minor misreads. You know, audiobooks should be word perfect. So when I'm working with my actors, I often say, you know, if you're on stage, I wouldn't correct the way you just changed this from A to the, or the way you just read that made perfect sense, but you left out a word. And we have to have that. But that's, we have the engineer and myself and even the other actors. How do you catch this when you're working by yourself?
Well, it's honestly, once I do the initial pass, it gets sent out to QC, and whichever publisher I'm working with has a team that then is listening to me verbatim. And then there's always a day of fixes or an hour of fixes.
Oh, okay.
So utopianly, it's not, especially with listening library, as you had mentioned, you know, even the nuance, I don't know if you know this, if it's dialogue and instead of saying like, I'm gonna go to the store, if it was going to the store, I, as an actor, cannot say gonna go to the store. I have to say going to the store. So because it has to be even, you know, the NGs at the end, you know, of words. If you're from Florida and, you know, you're using a colloquial accent, they'll still kind of nab you for it. They might for a very specific dialect or accent, but for the most part, they want every letter, you know, to be pronounced as it should be pronounced. So I'll get, you know, oftentimes within a week, you know, the list of things to be picked up. And then just a little thing is I take a picture of my setup in terms of my gain and everything that I was using during that session, because I will have had other sessions since then where, depending on if it's a commercial or if it's a loop group or whatever, or an animation project, I'll have to futz with my gain because I'm going to be louder, whatever. So when I go to do the fixes, I just look at my phone, reset it to exactly where it was, get, you know, my mic's in the same position, and then I feed it in. And then they give you, you know, the paragraph that is included with the error, so that I just read the whole paragraph. Other people will just do the pickup of the one sentence, but I like to give the final editors a little bit of extra stuff in case, you know, going to didn't cut in as nicely as, you know, the whole chunk.
That's crucial to get that work around it. See, we can usually get through the session because we have so many ears. We catch those on the fly for the most part. Every once in a while we run something. It's amazing how much they can fix electronically, though. I once read the word state and left out the T for whatever reason. I just said state. And the editor went in, the engineer went in and found the T somewhere else and pasted in between the S and the A and gave me a perfect pronunciation of state.
See, that's why I should just keep talking. Like, I shouldn't be editing myself or directing myself. Other people are smarter than me. I just need to be talking the words.
Well, that was a long, arduous fix. And the other thing it tells you is you really can't believe anything you hear.
Absolutely.
They can monkey with a text to make all kinds of people say all kinds of things in the political sense. This is dangerous.
Sure, absolutely.
So what was the most challenging project you've done?
For me, it's a different reason. But the fourth book of the Lunar Chronicle series, because that is the one and only time that I was really ill. And you know, in a series like that, they wait until, you know, I told you I love to read my books 3 times before I record it. I think they gave me the book like 3 days before the recording session, which is not ideal. And I was, I kept on getting pushed in the time to record because, fun fact, Joel Grey was using the studio. And he was taking longer than a traditional narrator to narrate his autobiography. Look, he's Joel Grey. If he wants to take, you know, 10 days to record 100 pages, the man can do no wrong in my eyes. So that kept on pushing out my session and pushing out my session. So then by the time that I got the book and it was vacated for me to use it, I had like 101 fever and just respiratory issues. So for me, it was challenging because, largely to what you said, Alicia, the breathing, you know, so much of it is stamina, and you don't realize how physical it is until one part of your body isn't working as well. And I like taking these long days, and I just felt like, oh, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And you feel, at least I do, for the authors, they've sometimes spent years on these books. And I would hate that something that I did didn't bring their work to light in the way that they had hoped, right? You know, you wrote the words. It's my job to bring them to life and be as word perfect because you chose those words in that order for a specific reason. You know, it's not my job to suddenly decide I'm going to flip things around. And, you know, and at that point, the series had a huge fan following. So I just thought like, oh, I can't let the listeners down. Oh, I can't let Marissa down. But every 2 minutes, I'm like, you know, throwing a tissue out. Oh, I think now with COVID, I shudder that I was in a studio with people. Luckily, it was just one other person sequestered. But yeah, that was the hardest. That was the hardest.
I have a quick question about that. So I know from being a librarian, oftentimes the audiobook comes out about the same time as the paper copy or the hard copy. How far in advance are you getting that book? If the book comes out December 1st, do you lay your eyes on it? Do you get like sneak previews, you know, 6 months before? Are you getting it a week before and you've got to turn it over so it's ready to go out?
Well, I think I'm guessing for the most part, unless it's sort of, I don't know, like a celebrity memoir or something like that, where they will push it to the end of the process. Normally there's I think a production schedule of about 3 months where I get to know things. I get my book before anybody else and get to read and highlight to my heart's content. I think that's it. The publishers would have more of an answer to that, but I feel like, you know, September generally means it's coming out like January 1st or something like that. Just in case anything goes awry, they have plenty of time to make the changes that they need.
When I started recording 25 years ago, simultaneous release was not a big thing. I could go to one of the big conferences like ALA and look for books. They were coming out in March, and we might not release, if we signed it up, might not release it until 9 months after that. But then there was more and more push to get books out simultaneously, which is really almost impossible with a full cast recording because it's so time consuming. And I'm not going to name the title, but I know of one book where the author, it was going to be done by another, this is a long story, but it was being done in full cast. And the author did not have time to do all the reasons he wanted to because they were rushing to get it recorded. They had to start recording so far in advance of bringing the book out. So that kind of deadline can impact in a negative way what's going on with the book. So we don't worry about simultaneous publication. We actually can't, it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
I have a question about character voices. Bruce, I was listening to one of your books, one of the alien books, and the alien had a really low, rumbly voice. And I was like, so is that narrator's choice? Does the narrator have to check in with you, be like, hey, Bruce, this is what I'm thinking for my alien? Or do you just kind of let them go and create voices for the different characters in your stories?
Can you tell me which book it was?
Aliens Ate My Homework.
Okay, that was done by Listening Library, single voice, Bill DeFries, who was an absolute genius. And so when, as an author, when a publishing company picks up your book to do, you have very little input into what they're doing. It's like, authors have no input into a film being made. It's not quite that bad. They'll consult me about maybe who should be a reader, but I'm not in the studio for that. I thought Bill's reading of that was absolutely flat out hilarious. And he responds to cues from the book. So yeah, if he reaches down, now when I'm directing, then I choose where I want the voices to land. But that was a project that was not hands-on and involved in.
And oftentimes, Alicia, from my end, I'm actually, I tend to live, I don't solely live in the YA world, but it's actually quite nice that I live in the YA world because so many of those authors are on some form of social media. And so when I find out that I'm doing their book and I've read their book, what I'll do is I'll hit them up on Twitter or Insta and then like say, hey, just want to introduce myself. I'm going to be narrating your audiobook and had some questions about, if you were going to cast this book with celebrities or, who was your utopian cast? My friend Dan Bittner and I, we've done a bunch of books together, but he kind of thinks similarly where I will label my characters either with the real people in real life that I'm trying to emulate, or because we did a series together where some of the characters that he read were in my chapters and vice versa. So he would say, this is my Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones. And I would say, this is my Maggie Smith, And so we get at least the essence of pacing and tonality. Obviously that's really challenging when, a male narrator and a female narrator have to match. So it's really about kind of like understanding the texture and the gruffness. And so I've really gotten to have some great relationships with the authors that I work with because I'll ask, I'll read my past first through and then just ask, questions about the text or the inspiration. And some love the communication and really, I've had authors actually say, actually, this is the documentary that I watched that inspired this, and will send me a clip, and it's just been delicious. And then others will be like, I trust you, I don't care, so it really runs the gamut.
What about pronunciation of names? If we're doing a fantasy novel, I will ask the author to record and send me a list of the names. One of the reasons that I do this is that the very first books I had recorded, and this would be well over 30 years ago, I had wanted to read one of them, The Monster's Ring, and I auditioned for recorded books. They don't like using author narrators, but they let me audition. They didn't use me. They have a very slow house style. Different houses have different styles. And they chose somebody, the recording to opening notes, partly because you could drive a truck through the space between the period and the beginning of the next sentence. Russell went to town. Then he saw Eddie. It was just, but the main thing was, they had always claimed that they paid his pronunciation. There's a significant character, the man who runs the magic shop. His name is spelled E-L-I-V-E-S. And it's pronounced E-Lives because he's a Mr. and that makes him Mr. E-Lives, which is mystery lives. So there's an embedded meaning in the name, and they got it wrong. And every time he pronounced it, it was like nails on a chalkboard for me. So I decided next one I was doing it on my own. And we got one of my most significant authors, Sid Fleischman, had the same problem. And he had a big book that I was bidding against recorded books on. And even though we didn't have the distribution, Sid said, yeah, I want Bruce to do this because he'll get the names right, because he'd been really burned by the same thing. So,
as a narrator, Bruce, I will find out that I pronounced something. It happened early on in my career. Luckily it was a minor character, but I pronounced it differently from the narrator. And I didn't know until I was doing an in-person event and with the narrator, and the narrator was talking about that character. And I thought, that's not how I pronounced it. oh my God. So that's hence why I go to social media. It's literally, I think, there was a little bit of permission, like, do I overstep? Am I reaching out to authors? Is that uncomfortable? But then I just thought, the diligent person that I am, that is guilt motivated, I just thought, like, oh my, I just mispronounced this. And, I want to make sure that I'm doing right, especially with sci-fi, but really in any of the novels, you want to make sure that it's being pronounced correctly.
So here's the reverse of that. What do you do when you find an error in the book?
We record it as written, and then we correct it. So we record it both ways, and then we flag it. And oftentimes what's great about that is, like, I'm really good friends with, personally, with E. Lockhart, Emily Jenkins, aka Emily Jenkins. And, a couple of times I'll find, like, little things that just in publishing, missed a spell check or whatever. And then I'll just say, hey, page 33, FYI, was blah, 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 blah. Is this what you wanted? Now, granted, that's a very personal relationship, but we'll do that for the publishers as well. And then they can go back and maybe now the initial print, because my books do come out together, the initial print may have that, but then all subsequent future prints are fixed. We
bring in the author to narrate whenever we can, supported by a cat. Author narrations are somewhat controversial, but when you're working with a full cast, they can really support the author. The author doesn't have to do all that acting, all those voices, but they do the narration whenever we can. And I have never had an author in the studio, never, in 25 years, who has not looked at me at some point with despair in his or her eyes and said, who wrote this shit? And they beg to correct things or to improve a phrase. And I said, my heart is as a heart of stone. You wrote it, you read it. But we did have one where we corrected on the fly. We were doing a story, well, it's called The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. It's a wonderful book. And one of the characters is going incognito. And she has this name that she's using as her disguise name. And there's a scene where she's working with all these farmhands, and one of them calls her by her real name. And the actor, it was like a 13-year-old kid who had that line. This had gotten past the author, the editor, the copy editor, the proofreader. This 13-year-old kid says to me, I don't know her name. Why am I saying this? So we did change it for the recording because it just was egregiously wrong.
Sure. Oh, interesting.
Just for members of the audience, we've got about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, be sure to pop it in the chat. My next question was about, so I guess I thought, like, I'm a famous author, right? And I think, Bruce, maybe you have more power than other authors, it sounds like, but I thought they're like, we're gonna record your book. Who do you want to do it? Here's some audio samples. And it sounds like maybe that's not the case. The author is told who's going to be recording their book. So I'm just wondering a little bit about the process of hiring a narrator. Who makes that decision? Does the author have any input? Does the narrator, as a narrator, have you ever said, no, thank you, that's not my style or not for me?
Well, in terms of how much input the author has, when I'm teaching adult writing, people ask things like about the cover and the artist if you're doing a picture book. And the answer is, it depends on how much you weigh. And by that, I mean, there's an old joke, where does an 800-pound gorilla sit? The answer is anywhere he wants. And your goal in building a career as a writer is to become an 800-pound gorilla. And every book gives you a few more pounds, and every success gives you a few more pounds. So I am now consulted in things that I would not have been maybe 20 years ago. Also, because I've been in the business so long, and I know some of the significant players, when my last books were recorded at Random House, the guy who runs Random Audio, Dan Zitz, a pretty good friend, so he would talk to me and say, who do you think can do this? What do you think would work for this voice? But I'm sort of in a privileged position in that regard.
And I would say, well, you know what, it's interesting. I don't turn down work due to content. It's normally just due to schedule, conflicts. Because I'm actually in a privileged position where oftentimes I'm now just offered a book Rebecca, we have this book for you. Would you like to do it? And when that happens, I'll get like the blurb on the book and kind of the style. But I'm game. Look, I'm an avid reader. I'll read anything. So I love it. I love all books. So are there other books that, you know, I've loved recording more than others? Of course, you know, beautifully written books versus like things that are not so great. But again, you know, I won't know that until I get that first copy sent to me, because and if I do audition, which I'm still happy to audition, because I think, to the point, no matter how established and how many books I've narrated and whatever awards, if my voice isn't the voice that Bruce thought of, it's not that my voice isn't a good voice. It's just that he had something else in mind. He gets to choose. I believe firmly he should be able to choose. You know, I consider, this is like my metaphor that I use in life and in all my acting work, which is like, I am cilantro. You either love cilantro or I taste like soap. Right. And if Bruce is making a peach pie, I, as an actor, cannot put on a cinnamon stick costume and have my cilantro leaves peeking out and then pretend to be cinnamon, right? Because real cinnamon's going to walk in the door and just like nail it, right? But what I can do is unapologetically be cilantro and say, this is my POV, this is how I interpreted it, these are my thoughts, these are my choices. And so sure, that might not work for the pie, but maybe there's a stew that he made that he wasn't thinking about using cilantro for, but suddenly he sees an interesting flavor profile that he's going to add. And so that has taken a long time as an actress to make that distinction. But I think that metaphor works in life in general, you know, to really kind of honor your gut and your instincts and to not try to be something that you're not. And it's seen me through. It has definitely seen me through. It still makes me sad when I don't get the things that I desperately want to book, you know, but I get, you know, when you see the other person and you're like, yep, she was cinnamon. She's really good. She's cinnamon. Yeah.
That's gorgeous. I think this is a question I can't really answer because I bulled my way in, but for our audience, I think they want to know how you got started in audiobooks.
Oh, I'll be really quick. And
that was my next question. So take your time to answer.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, it's 11:41.
No, or advice for anybody who's looking to get into it.
So I went to school for acting. And did, you know, you love musical theater. I studied musical theater at Carnegie Mellon, and I graduated, came to New York City. And as I say, is that if you're trying to be an actor, you go where the yeses are. You have specialities and special skills that you do really well, but ultimately you don't have a lot of control. You audition for a whole lot of things that you get invited into rooms to audition for, and wherever the yeses are tends to be a little bit of, at least at the beginning, where your yeses take you. And how I got into voiceover is a frustrating story for any aspiring voiceover person because it's not duplicatable. I was watching a seminar on getting paid to proofread that my friend was conducting, and I was being her ears, and the gentleman that was recording it for her, doing all the audio, is, and your audience may know him, Michael Sinner Nicholas. He owns a studio called NYAV, and he is Dean Venture and the Venture Brothers, and he's a brilliant director and he's a brilliant actor. And we went out to eat afterwards, and I knew he was, but I didn't creep on him. I wasn't like, oh, I would like to do voiceover. I just was having fries and having a good time. And at the end of the night, he said, hey, do you do little kid voices? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm having auditions on Wednesday for this anime that I'm directing. Do you want to come in and audition? And I said, sure. Not thinking that it would mean anything. And I booked that anime, and that got me another job. It got me another job. That got me another job. And it got me my agent, Sherry Hoffman, who is hilarious. And she's like, I know you like to read, and I know you do voices. I think you need to do audiobooks. And so she took me into the booths at Innovative and coached me on my first auditions, really mentored me, because it's a very different style, you know, and I was performing, which you can't perform an audiobook. You have to sit in it and not project so much. So she really guided me in my first few auditions, and I booked one book. and one book gets to you another, and so it's a process. But at the core of it, for the people that are looking at it, it's good acting. And so I think going to acting school, if you're a musician, that's helpful too, because you can hear tonality, you know, different tones and textures and things. Not critical, but it doesn't, you know, people have really cool voices all the time and they're like, I want to get into voiceover, but just because you sound like this doesn't mean that when you get a script, you're going to bring it to life. And why acting is critical is because it's the ability to see nuance and bring things to life. That is why people want to listen to you, you know, because sound or a tone just on repeat for 300 pages isn't compelling enough. It's the acting choices that you do. So that would be my recommendation.
I want to add to that, that even great actors can't, some can't do audiobooks. It's a very specialized skill. This industry is rife with stories of big name people, one on a writer, who just storm out of the studio because they're so frustrated. They're just not used to working that way. And we work with a local community of actors. And one of the things that's great for me is that I have people who are fabulous actors, just not as pretty as people that you'd see on the New York stage. But you know, in audio, I can cast for voice and not looks. It gives me freedom. But there are some really gifted actors that I've worked with who very much want to, who do voice work for me as characters, but are dying to narrate, and they simply can't do it. It is a really refined skill, and most people don't realize how truly difficult it is.
Yeah, it's a marathon, and I think other parts of voiceover are sprints. You know, you know, my average booking for any other, with the exception of like loop group and ADR sessions, those are all day, but I'm not talking and I'm not holding prose all day. I'm like, look at that woman over here. You're the blonde lady. Make, you know, follow her and match flap. Where, you know, so they're sprints. It's sprints of energy and sprints of inspiration and of responsibility. The chapter 1 to through the end, keeping that pace, that dynamic. And in my earlier books, I feel like the book owned me. And I think that's partly why I'm so maniacal about prepping. When I sit down to read, I want to own the book. I want to set the pace. I want to decide. I'm making this choice, not like I'm running out of breath or, oh, let's turn the page. But I am driving the book instead of the book driving me.
Nice. Really quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
I was just saying, if we had more time, I would ask Rebecca to talk about how she prepares the manuscript itself. But maybe the next session.
Yes, I would love for this to be like a 2-hour talk. But really quickly, I do want to say happy birthday Eve to you, Bruce. Somebody just posted in the chat. Happy birthday Eve to you. And they had a quick question.
I'll be 71 tomorrow.
Wow, congratulations. Is there going to be a full cast audio recording of Thief of Worlds?
I'm trying to decide about that. Random House opted not to do it for Listening Library. So I have the rights back to it. And it'll be a little bit difficult to cast. I'm debating now whether I'll read it myself as a single voice or if I can find the actors to do it.
Okay.
I'd love to do it with the full cast, but it might just be me. Or I have a friend, Vikas Adam, who might do it. Do you know Vic, Rebecca?
I do, yeah.
He started with us 25 years ago.
Oh, wow.
In college, he did his first audio work in books that we were doing here.
Wow, that's cool. So cool.
All right.
Do you
have any final questions?
We're out of town. Or out of town.
Okay.
Out of time.
Get out of town.
Get out of town. We're out of time. It was a pleasure. Like I said before the people came in, I've probably listened to 1,000 audiobooks, like not kidding. I am a huge fangirl. And anybody out there that hasn't tried one yet, you can listen while you're cleaning your room. You can listen while you're in the car. I highly encourage you to give it a chance. Start with a book you already know and love. That's the best way to start on audio. Other than that, thank you for coming, and we'll see you in a couple minutes at another session.
Great. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye, guys.